The OTC, the over-the-counter market, has had a lot of attention from the regulators and press in the past year or so. Do you think it's been given a rough ride, or do you think the market is due for a shakedown?
I think when you talk about the OTC market, I think you need to be clear. I think the OTC describes a way in which transactions and trades get processed. So I think if you're talking about OTC derivatives specifically, then it's received a lot of press attention. It's received a lot of political and regulatory attention. Rightly so, I don't know. I mean, there have clearly been a number of issues that have occurred over the last 2-3 years, specifically around the use of derivatives. You've only got to look at AIG to understand that there are some issues. But I think the other thing you've got to remember is the OTC market is not broken. It still functions perfectly well. The OTC market still manages to provide hedging instruments to corporates, to financial institutions. There's still a mechanism through derivatives for them to be able to lower their cost of borrowing and ultimately provide liquidity. So the market isn't broken. I think there are some certain issues within the market, and I think the G20 are trying to address some of those systemic market risk issues. And the pronouncement we saw in September 2009 is clearly looking to do that. It's looking to tackle the systemic risk. It's looking to increase the transparency within that market and potentially also to identify areas of market abuse. So yes, I think there are some issues within the OTC derivatives market. I don't think it's broken, but we are now on a flight path to central counterparty clearing. That is going to happen. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. So the regulators, driven by the politicians, are looking to address some of the perceived issues in that market. It's clear.
Just to change topic, looking at the an investor managers fund directive, how will that affect investor performance, and is it in danger of being just for Europe?
There's some danger that it's just for Europe, but I think in principle people are looking at fiduciary risk and the responsibility of depositories to protect investors at the end of the day. I think the concern has been the level of strict liability and the clauses around strict liability and the cost one would have to bear to ensure that type of activity. So as a bank, one typically doesn't provide insurance, so while providing custodial services and contractual custodial services, the concern has been the cost to which strict liability will be passed on to the investor. And at the end of the day, all costs get passed on to the end investor. As OTC clearing you talked about before, it's the exact same way with the AIFMD. So if you increase that cost of liability and the need for a financial institution to carry that, that always gets passed on to the end investor. Now, while the strict liability has been relaxed from a depository perspective, it's still not finalized. So it is a bit of a moving feast. It is specific to Europe right now, but certainly the U.S. is looking at similar regulation. This could pass on through to UCITS 4. So depositories need to be prepared. I think the real question for many of the depositories from the beginning was, what's the cost of capital? How much capital will they have to commit? And is the depository infrastructure in Europe actually able to put that much capital against custodian risk? And if they are, it's going to be fewer institutions with obviously less choice and a centralization of that risk. So it's quite a balance that people are trying to strike.
If you look at the issue around OTC derivatives and the move towards central counterparty clearing, as Drew said, there is an inherent cost in that to the end user. So if you look at a pension fund, for example, the pension fund now hedging its inflation risk is going to have a one-way derivative position that it's going to have to put initial margin up to the clearing houses. It's going to have to put up initial margin based on having to borrow cash probably to post. So there's an inherent cost involved in all that. So the very people you set out to protect through those central counterparty clearing mechanisms are likely to have to pick up some of the inherent cost of doing that. So does that lead people then to not hedge using derivatives? Do we end up getting to a situation where actually the very thing you're looking to protect actually changes fundamentally because of the costs involved in doing so?
Which follows on to the AIFMD. It's where you put so much liability onto the depository that depository then restricts what the asset manager is able to do. So for example, if an asset manager sees investment opportunity within a particular market, but the fiduciary is not willing to sign up an agent or go direct to that market because the strict liability would be imposed, you're actually not only adding a cost, but potentially reducing the amount of investment performance that an underlying fund would have, which at the end of the day does cost the end investor, whether it be a pension fund or whatnot. So protection will cost, I guess, is the answer at the end of the day.